Good evening and welcome. If I could please call this meeting to order, and if we could start with a moment of silence for prayer or reflection. Thank you.
Your Worship, if a point of privilege, if I could.
Yes, absolutely.
I'm not going to make a lot of comments, but I would ask that we spend a moment honoring a time-honored colleague, an individual who was truly committed to our community and a lifetime citizen of Medicine Hat, someone very important around this table, former Alderman Wayne Craven. We've lost him. And I'd like to ask if we take another moment of silence to honor his memory.
Yes. Thank you. Or are you going to say anything else? If you are welcome to say something. You served with them the longest.
Oh, well, I mean, I wasn't going to, but I will say a couple of things. You know, Wayne Craven was, first of all, he grew up in Medicine Hat. He lived his whole life here, and he served this community in many ways. I mean, you'll remember him for several reasons. Some of you didn't know him, but he started part of his career as a broadcaster. He had this rich, beautiful voice that you never forget once you hear him. He spent all of his adult life involved in the arts, in theater and the arts overall, absolutely committed. He was a Citizen of the Year when we still had those awards, and he and his wife raised their family here. He was on this council 3 different times, and very, very committed to this community. Wayne would, his biggest passion, I guess, would be the economy and business, because he was also a businessman himself, involved in real estate, and with his brother, built our only high-rise, really, that we still have, our apartment downtown, and a business owner and a property owner. But the thing he loved the best was this council. And he would spend hours researching a position, and then he would argue it. You know, he'd pound the table, he'd scare the rest of council half to death because he was so strong in his position, but he'd do it all with a twinkle in his eye and a little bit of a tiny smile. And if you knew him well enough, you could see the theatrics in what he was doing to help make his point stronger. And I have some fabulous stories about Wayne through the years that I probably won't share at this table. But a marvelous, marvelous sense of humor and a wonderful man. And his family is still here. And of course, obviously, none of us can go to the funeral. But I appreciate you letting me say something, because a dear friend, a time-honored colleague, as I say.
Thank you. Councillor Dumanowski.
Your Worship, I'm sure all of us could take a moment in our own way to recognize former Councillor Alderman Wayne Craven. I had the pleasure of being on council for 2-3 terms with him around the table. And as Councillor Friesen said, I remember my very first term, 2001, having been put on at least one of the committees I was on with him was economic development, which was in-house at the time. And I was seated to his right, and I remember as certainly a junior councillor and a younger councillor, age 30, being quite intimidated by him, not because he wasn't pleasant or friendly, but because of his experience, his voice, his command of the audience and the meeting, and his ability to understand issues on a profound level, quite frankly. But I soon learned to identify the strong characteristics that he brought out in his leadership role, and wanted to mimic those. I mean, that's really part of any role we have in leadership, is to try and glean and grow through our relationships with each other. But in this particular role, it's important that even though you are a strong counselor or a voice around the table, you have to be able to build consensus. And that was something that Wayne Craven was able to do extraordinarily well. I will say that one of the benefits, and sometimes the taxpayer question when we go on these conferences, what are the benefits other than having the ability to attend sessions and look at policy and meet with other counselors around the province or around the country. That was really where I had the opportunity to get to know Wayne on a personal level. And I'll tell you, that was a cherished opportunity, because once you got to know him, you got to see why he was sitting here. You got to see why he was in this community, and was lending this profound experience and wealth of information and a passion for this community. And I love the fact that, like me, I grew up on the Flats. He was a proud kid who grew up there, and that probably brought us close too. But really, we're recognizing him today not because he was a counselor, because counselors are more important than anyone else. Anyone who passes away has lived a life and is cherished by their families and their community. But certainly Wayne did devote many years around this table and helped shape a lot of policy and decisions, very important ones around this table that made the community what it is today. And I'm honored to have had the opportunity to serve with him and to get to know him. He was a great guy, and he will be missed by this community.
Thank you. Move on.
Okay, let's move on now to adoption of the agenda. I do have 2 items to add. 10.1 will be appointment to the Combative Sports Commission. And 10.2 will be a notice of motion from Councillor Samraj.
That will be 9.1 for the notice of motion.
Yes, sorry, 9.1.
Okay. All right, any other additions? Seeing none, we'll accept it.
Next, we have adoption of the minutes from our last meeting, April 19th.
Any errors, omissions? Seeing none?
Moving on now to our presentations. Our first presentation tonight is our regular COVID-19 update from Eric Brown, our Manager of Support Services, Fire and Emergency Services.
Welcome, Eric, you have the floor.
Your Worship, members of council. Unfortunately, I wish I was standing before you to tell you how well we're doing, both as a province and as a city. Unfortunately, we're definitely trending upwards. We're seeing numbers that we have never seen before. This includes daily new cases, active cases, positivity rate. Just as a couple of examples, just even today. So the province has seen 23,608 cases. So these are active cases. This is the highest we've ever been before, and we're trending upwards. We've seen 2,012 new cases today, which actually wasn't even our highest. We saw our highest provincially on Saturday in the 2,400 range. Another new record that was broken today is actually our positivity rate. So the first record was broken on Saturday with 12% positivity rate. We just broke another record today, provincially, at 13.2 positivity rate. So when you start thinking about a 2,000 active cases or 2,000 new cases at 13.2 positivity rate, those are some high numbers. Unfortunately, the city's not alone. So the city's now seeing 231 active cases. So when we start thinking about what we saw on Friday, we saw 184 cases on Friday, and we're seeing 231 cases today. In 4 days, we saw an increase of 47 cases. Although that may not seem a lot compared to the province's 2,000 cases, we have never seen this before. We're at the highest rate that we've been at since the onset of the pandemic, and we're trending upwards. The province announced a number of new restrictions on Thursday. This is 350 cases per 100,000 people within a region, a municipality, and 250 active cases. So that next threshold or new set of restrictions actually kicks in at that point. We're very close to that threshold. So 2 more municipalities within Alberta got put onto that hotspot list, and we're very, very close to sitting within that hotspot list. But this may not be a valid, I guess, restriction, because just today, the province announced that there could be, or most likely will be, additional provincial-wide restrictions announced tomorrow. So this may not be a valid point as it relates to these new restrictions. Bit of I guess, a personal note as it relates to this presentation. I intentionally develop this presentation every Sunday night. And the reason that I do that, and I've done that ever since the onset of the pandemic for you, council members, is because things change on a daily basis. I don't know if there's going to be announcements on the weekend. I don't know if there's going to be announcements on Monday. So hence I guess the fluidity of these announcements that are coming forward, and we're seeing it once again. I just found out about these new restrictions or potential new restrictions coming tomorrow, and I will find out and you will find out at the same time that the public finds out. These are very fluid and dynamic times. Once what we saw at the onset of the pandemic and throughout the past 14 months. So regardless of the regional restrictions, we are definitely preparing for new restrictions, whether these be the restrictions that get announced tomorrow or the regional restrictions that we're very close to hitting. We are preparing for those. The regional restrictions relates to 2 aspects. So the first one, very much community-based, very much school-based. So once we hit that threshold as a community with 250 cases, that's actually our threshold, 250 active cases, junior high, high school moves online for a specified period of time. Gyms close, so personal fitness training, so that's out. But from a city perspective, all of our recreational facilities are forced to close. So that includes personal training, so the Family Leisure Center, Kinplex, all of those youth sports are out. So all of those activities that children participate on a regular basis are out for a specified period of time. So although it might be a short-lived restriction, these are all still restrictions that impact us. All of these restrictions can very much be circumvented by the behaviors of all of us. Following the restrictions, getting vaccinated if we can. We've had a number of staffing impacts throughout the course of the pandemic for the past 14 months, but we've never quite seen the staffing impacts that we're seeing right now. We've been very, very fortunate as an organization to have very low positive cases within our own staff, and we still see that. Where we're seeing our impacts organizationally is what they deem as close contacts. We're seeing a far higher rate of our own staff having to isolate based on being deemed a close contact. That's where we're seeing our impacts. We're seeing it right across the board. I think it goes without saying, I know we've all heard it on the media that some of our firefighters were put into isolation for a short period of time, and this is increasing. When the case counts go up within our own local community, and I've said this before, our organizational risk also increases. And we're seeing this right now. We need to drive this down. We all need to practice those safe behaviors, practice those responsible decisions so that we can support each other. Not only the local community, but the organization and our own essential services for that matter. A glimmer of hope is vaccine. So additional announcements were made today regarding additional, availability and eligibility for teachers, childcare workers, where we're seeing a lot of cases in schools. So it's recognized that obviously that's a high-risk occupation as it relates to transmission. But I think also as it relates to organizational effectiveness with us, police officers, and I know this has been a good topic of discussion, but firefighters. Firefighters were placed onto the vaccination list last Friday. There's been a lot of discussion provincially on this item, so firefighters have now been placed on this list, no different than police officers. So we're thankful for the province to be making this decision, no different than we're thankful for the province to be announcing teachers and childcare workers, recognizing that's where we're seeing quite a few of our kids or cases is within the school-based area. And I want to make this very clear as well. We do support provincial efforts wherever possible. So this may take into account various, numerous different, avenues where we support Alberta Health Services and Alberta Health wherever we can. They struggle. Just no different than anybody else struggles throughout this pandemic, trying to manage this process through the past 14 months. This is very much a partnership. We have an excellent relationship with Alberta Health Services, and we continue to maintain that relationship through these support measures that we provide. They support us, we support them. And I wanted to just take this last moment, and although I've painted a bit of a grim picture for you right now, it's very important to recognize our members of the community that are all doing the right thing, that are really taking this seriously. There is still a reason why we're sitting at 231 cases, and some of our municipalities, or some of the municipalities across the province, some of comparable sizes are upwards of over 1,000 active cases. But there's a word of caution on that one as well, recognizing that some of these municipalities had very, very low case counts and very, very quickly increased. So a word of caution based on that statement as well. We could be there as well. So we really need to practice those safe decisions, those responsible decisions. We've had high cases before. We can bring it down once again. We've done it before. We can do it again. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Merrick. Any questions? Councillor Hirsch.
Well, once again, Merrick, I think you always try to do a positive spin on things, and in this case, I think it's just a challenge to do so, but I think, going forward, we all know what the repertoire is in order for us to flatten the curve, and certainly we should be looking at that. It's interesting, as we get ourselves in the city of Medicine Hat gets a little closer to where we're now a hotspot, it leads down to a bunch of questions that was asked of me. And one was, and I'll ask you to do it at a provincial level, and then I ask you to do the analysis on a municipal level. And it has to do with testing. Do we, at the provincial level, is our testing commensurate with and consistent with other provinces? Right now, Alberta per capita is actually leading and infamously, sadly. So that's one question from a testing point of view, because if you have a big pool, the likelihood is you're going to get more numbers as opposed to the smaller pool. So we just want to make sure, like, if it's an apples to apples comparison. And then municipally speaking, with our municipal cousins of a Lethbridge or whatever, is the same pattern of testing, is that consistent as well?
Two excellent questions, and through the chair, I'll just recognize obviously the provincial matter first. And so Throughout the course of the pandemic, as stated by the provinces, we have had a much higher testing rate than most other municipalities. But I want to maybe put a word of caution on that one, because one could correlate, yes, more tests equal more active cases. There are so many other factors or metrics that actually go into this as well. So a couple of metrics that I did not mention is what's known as a reproductive number, a reproductive value. So basically dictates how fast the virus is growing, and it was just announced based on last week's value. So typically we sit around 1.04, 1.06 as a province, which means anything over 1, you're increasing, you're going to have higher numbers. Anything below 1, you're going to be decreasing. So on average, 1.404, 1.06, we've seen upwards of 1.10. Just today, they announced 1.18. So increase at an exponential level right now. So yes, we are definitely increasing as it relates to testing, which would correlate to increase in, I guess, active cases. Another, I guess, metric to really consider, though, is that positivity rate. So if we're looking at 13.2%, so more than one of those individuals that get tested out of 10 get positive or get a positive result. And so that paints a really important picture as it relates to the number of tests provided through the province and the number of active cases. So you got to kind of put all of these metrics together to try to find, I guess, paint a more accurate picture. ICU rates is another one. Hospitalizations, we're seeing the highest number of hospitalizations, seeing highest ICU admissions since the onset of the pandemic. Yes, deaths or daily deaths, extremely low. We're seeing upwards of 3 to 5 per day of deaths per day within the province. In December, we were seeing anywhere between 20 and 30 per day. But the real, I guess, factor as it relates to the province's response to this is not to overload the healthcare system. So when you start looking at ICU admissions, hospital rates increasing, that means that we're going in the wrong direction. Locally, thankfully, the province has started, publishing data as it relates to zone-specific testing and positivity rate, and it correlates the same way as the province right now. So we're increasing in testing, obviously, within the south zone, which ultimately increase in cases as well. Unfortunately, we don't get city-specific, so Medicine-Hat-specific data. We get zone-specific, but it is following a similar trend as to what the rest of the province is. Keeping in mind as well, population also plays a big factor in it. Density, demographics, things like this. We've been fairly fortunate in southeastern Alberta. Other municipalities have not fared so well, but it's very difficult to compare one municipality to another given density, demographics, ages, various things like that.
Thank you.
Councillor McIntosh.
Thanks, Your Worship. So, Merrick, on the weekend, Premier Kenney announced that the Ledge was going to shut down meetings for a period of 2 weeks minimum. I, as an elected representative of this community, have a concern that we are sitting here tonight sending the wrong message to our community, as we have people that perhaps are not sitting 6 feet apart. We have our plexiglass that we've kind of laughed about a little bit over the last several months in terms of how safe that actually is. Now with our numbers going up, I want to know what your emergency management comment would be on us continuing to meet. And I know the numbers have gone up very quickly, but should we be meeting 2 weeks ago like we are right now, or should we be changing our plan of attack just to send the right message?
Excellent question. Through the chair, I'll be honest, it's been on my mind. It's been on my mind over the past couple of days, recognizing that the case rates were going up. And these are one of the things that we tackle within my office is how do we protect the community to the best of our ability, and every action that we do as an organization can have an impact on the rest of those. I don't have a direct answer for you on this one. However, it's something that has definitely needs to be discussed here in the near future.
So would that be a city council making that decision, or would that be you having a discussion with the city manager and saying this is our plan moving forward?
Through the chair, that'd be the latter.
Counselor Dumanowski?
Well, Merrick, you answered almost everything I was curious about or would probably ask you. I guess where I want to go is, obviously there could be new restrictions, or it sounds like there will be new restrictions announced tomorrow, and that can have impacts to our city services, which you've indicated. And I think the public is, I don't want to take it lightly, but I think they're used to that. They anticipate that could happen and would happen, and they can work around that. The problem I have, or the concern I have, is obviously the example that you brought up around the firefighters and the scenario there. I mean, there are some services we can't shut down. There are some services we can't work from home in a reasonable way. And our emergency services certainly fit that litmus test, water treatment. And we could go through, and I'm not trying to prioritize, but we have a number of critical services that would put us in a very precarious situation if we had, mass groups have to self-isolate. Having working in a school setting, I've seen how one case can have an incredible impact very quickly on an immense amount of not only students, but staff implications. So extrapolate that into the emergency services setting. I'm wondering if there are extraordinary measures that we are now looking at doing or have been put in place after the fire service scare, I'll call it, because of the potential for it to happen again, quite frankly. And I think the moment we don't allow ourselves to believe that, not because I can see something that no one else can, but as I have conversations with people about this last year, when this first all happened, no one could really name anyone that was impacted by it. We knew it was happening, but we didn't know anybody. Then the second wave, we started to know, oh, I know somebody, or somebody knew somebody. Now, I could name them on my hand. So it's impacting this community, and it's impacting this city on a level like unprecedented. So are we looking at doing, or have we implemented extraordinary measures to safeguard those critical services?
Excellent question. And through the chair, and I definitely can provide some examples from an operational level, specifically within fire and emergency services as to what's been taken on. I really do have to commend our director team on implementing quite a few of these measures, and not just within fire and emergency services, but all essential services for that matter. And these are just some of these examples. So one of the things that we've done recently, and working from home is obviously an easy one. Obviously, firefighters can't work at home, but administration staff can work at home. And so we have implemented that process. So anything that we can do to limit the transmission within the actual fire stations itself, we've taken advantage of. So that's just one measure. One of the most important measures I think that we've taken, recognizing that firefighters can't work at home. Firefighters have to be at the station. Firefighters have a specified time in which they must respond. So they can't work at home, drive to the fire station, and be able to respond to a serious event. So they must be there. With that, we've taken a number of measures, and our director team has taken a number of measures, such as limiting the non-essential training that must take place. Yes, there is essential training that must take place, but we've definitely limited that as well, just recognizing that it limits the transmission and limits the ability for people to get closer together. Some of the other ones that have been done is limiting which shifts actually cross with other shifts. It's something that we've done since the onset of this pandemic, and it's actually worked very well for us, because when you have one fire crew that's crossing over another fire crew, let's say day shift and night shift, last thing that we want to do is have those two crews cross. And so whatever we can do to limit station transmission, because if we do have the ability to function should something go wrong, and that, I guess that proved it a couple of weeks ago there. But anything that we can do to limit the number of crews that are off at any given time, we can provide all of the services that we can with one crew out. But recognizing as well that we need to really be careful as to how many crews go out at any given time. With that as well, and I'll use some examples of just general essential services within other departments, water treatment, wastewater treatment plant, electric generation for that matter, is we have built a contingency list below the standard operator level that we can call upon if needed. So these may be retired staff, these may be staff that maybe have moved into other leadership positions or management positions, but still have the ability to operate, let's say, a water treatment plant or electric generation plant if need be. So these are just a couple of examples. Our director group and our departments have really taken this to heart. We've used it a few times, as we've seen, and it's proven quite successful within this process. We don't want to keep doing this, though. We need the community support so that we can keep our essential services running, no different than the community needs our support as well.
Thank you. Councillor Friesen?
Through the chair, thanks again, Merrick. Good report. I don't want to say it makes me happy, but an informative report. I wanted to ask you, and I'm not trying to suggest this is your personal responsibility. I want to understand it better. You know, in Medicine Hat and throughout the country, for that matter, there have been rallies and events that are in direct contravention, on purpose, to the restrictions. And so we've had them here, and they've had them everywhere. Some bigger, some smaller, and so on. And we get quite a few inquiries from the public, you know, saying, and it's hard to understand, if I have to or commit to following the restrictions, why can other people en masse get away with, if you will, flaunting them and perhaps impacting children and others, of course. So I don't know if you can answer me, but can you give me a sense of who owns what and what that looks like?
Excellent question. Through the chair. And this has been, I guess, an evolving process throughout the pandemic, because first we saw bylaw officers that were able to enforce these restrictions, then police officers, Alberta Health, public health inspectors. So right at this point, within the city, there's two agencies that can actively enforce. And so this would be Alberta Health Services, so they're public health inspectors, and Medicine Hat Police Service. But I want to make it very, very clear how this process works in the background as well. So our police officers that are authorized to basically enforce these measures have a strong partnership and strong communication with Alberta Health Services. So whenever there is any type of enforcement measures that may take place or do take place, there is always that communication back and forth as to how that occurs. And I know this has been brought up before, but it comes down to different things like business licenses and various things like that. We have public health orders there for a reason. These public health orders are there specifically for the pandemic. Alberta Health Services, or Alberta Health for that matter, the ministry, put these in place specifically for what we're going through right now. We need to go back to those public health orders and use them where possible. And I know that there have been a number of businesses within our local community that perhaps have been, flouting the restrictions. And I do want to say, though, that this is an evolving process as well. Alberta Health Services and our own police services are actively managing these processes. Although it may not seem right from face value, as something may not be happening, things are happening. Things are happening in the background, and so we need to be cognizant of some of those things. But ultimately, the accountability and the authority really comes from the public health orders that come from Alberta Health. And so we really need to rely on those. And ultimately, there is that partnership between Alberta Health Services and our own police services.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? All right. Very thorough tonight, Merrick. Thank you very much. If we could have a motion for reception.
So moved.
I'll second that.
Vote. That was unanimous. Thank you.
Merrick. Our next presentation is the culture update of Aaron Nelson, who's our manager of culture, events, experience, and programming. And the background to this presentation is item 6.2 in your packets.
Welcome, Aaron. This presentation comes with some intrigue
Some
for
intrigue.
those of us that haven't seen it.
Excellent.
Now, I know we were all text a link. You're going to tell us what we're supposed to do, or?
We'll talk about that in a minute.
Okay. I'll leave it alone.
All right, good evening. Thank you so much for your time. What I want to talk about tonight is three concepts: amplification, facilitation, and inspiration, and specifically how we are thinking differently in community development and more specifically experiences and events. So this will relate directly to Council's strategic priority, the Sunshine Hospitality, and even more specifically to our the key result 5.2, which is enrich the city's arts and cultural scene by continuing to showcase a diverse range of talent, offer a variety of programs and services, and celebrate and preserve local history. Remember when we used to do this, right? So this is a hard slide to show after what Merrick has just discussed, but we used to gather, we used to breathe moistly all over each other and share food and have these collective community experiences. Maybe that was at the Esplanade or Co-op Place. Maybe you were attending an art exhibition, or maybe it was outside sharing a common interest with other community members. So the good news is we will do that again. So that will happen again when it is safe and appropriate to do so. But all of these were based on the hub model. So that's gathering people in one spot for an event. So whether that be at the Esplanade or Co-op Place. And we will do this again. So there's good plans to do this again, and a study has just come out where 67% of Albertans will do what they did before and try other experiences that they've learned during the pandemic. So I want to talk a little bit about how we're thinking, and most importantly, doing differently, and how we will do differently in the future as well. So the questions we've asked ourselves is, how do we amplify our current assets? How do we amplify what we already have? How can we facilitate our community doing more? How can we facilitate the community developing their own cultural experiences? And how can we inspire? And I think particularly this last point is important because inspiration is critical to our community right now, considering where we are in the pandemic. So we've had to meet people where they are at, and this is where they're at this year. They're on their phones and they're on their computers. We've been unable to gather. So our first order of business was to get our content out through our social media channels. How can we amplify the current content that we have and get it out through those channels? So just some quick statistics here. We've seen growth in Instagram. And what we're really seeing is growth in interactions, and that's really what we're interested in. Not so many the amount of people, but the interactions, meaningful interactions with folks. We've seen growth in Facebook as well, and I'll talk more specifically about that in a minute. And then Twitter is where we put out a lot of our heritage content. So just today, there was a post about in 1931 on May 5th, Ripley's Believe It or Not, did a story on Medicine Hat because we never shut off our gas lamps, right? Because the gas was so... and these stories are critical, these heritage stories, because they're shared stories of the community of who we are. And if we know who we are, we're going to know where we're going. So we've had great success getting these out through social media channels. This is just a brief one, and I just want to show you some numbers around this one. This was a story about the Finlay Bridge, building of the Finlay Bridge. But what we had on this one is went out to about 6,600 people. 329 people clicked on this post. So we don't get those sort of numbers daily in a museum. So we don't get people actually reading, 300 people reading a didactic in a museum. So we're taking that content and we're putting it out into the community through social media. So not ideal, but I think it is critical to build those stories of a community. Our archives, what we found during the pandemic is our archives, the use hasn't increased, but the depth of use has increased. So that's local people researching about their home, about their family connections. We get many, many inquiries from across North America about people wanting to know maybe relatives that lived here, things like that. So archives, again, are critical to develop the bed of these stories. And we'll talk about how important in a moment here. We have over 20,000 artifacts in the museum, and unfortunately, the way museums operate is many of those objects will always stay in the back. So those are our objects are a session to tell the story, but we don't have the facilities to show them all the time. But what if we had the opportunity to tell those stories of each of those objects? So this year, we've been able to tell the story weekly of over 50 objects by the What Is That Wednesdays. So we'll see a little clip here.
Hello again, and welcome back to the What Is That video series. I would imagine that most of you watching this video are probably sitting behind a keyboard of some kind or another. Whether it's a physical keyboard or digitally part of your cell phone or tablet, keyboards have become a really important part of how we communicate with the digital world.
So I would love to watch all those, but we're not going to watch all of this right now. So we do those once a week, and it's a specific story about an object in our collection. So just to give you a little bit of stats on how something like this functions. So this went out, 1,700 people watched this in the first day. We saw that 667 people actually watched this video, which I got really excited about because, again, tremendous interaction. But I do have to pause here and maybe make an excuse for the shrinking attention span of humanity. The trouble is almost nobody watches it all the way through. They'll watch the first 24 seconds. Okay, so that is not unlike the museum world. Not everybody who comes into the museum world looks at everything, or into the museum, looks at everything for 5 minutes. They'll glance, right? So there's the streakers, the strollers, and the scholars. So what we found is after 24 seconds, the viewership drops off quite a bit. So what we're doing is we're retooling. Can we get as much content into that 24 seconds, again, to tell our collective story of who we are as a community? During this time of COVID, we've facilitated more learning experiences. So we'll call it the unfield trip. So what do you do when students can't come to the Esplanade for a field trip? What if we went to them? So we've developed 14 discrete learning experiences that are akin to a field trip, 7 academic and 7 art. And what an e-box is a curricular-based learning kit that provides lessons delivered over the course of several hours to a few days. The kit includes all supplies needed to deliver the lessons from 2 to 30 learners. It's a field trip in a box. It includes artifacts, it includes a digital component, includes all the curricular connections and teaching materials. And all that content is directly related to the content that we produce in the museum. So the great thing about a field trip in a box is we can access many more people. So many more school districts, home learners. We've had this box go out to families of 2, and we've had it go to classrooms of 30. Now, field trips were shrinking, and field trips were shrinking mostly because of the changing of the budget structures in schools. It became very expensive to bus students to the Esplanade over the last 5 years. So this graph is 5 years of field trips, with the far right being our e-boxes this year. And this is over the first quarter of the year. So we just started the e-box in the last 6 weeks of the quarter. So I have no doubt that we'll access more learners over time with our e-box than we do during the field trip. So I think what's important, and I started off this presentation saying Albertans will engage in what they engaged in before and new activities. We'll still do field trips. Children will still come to the Esplanade, but we've developed a whole new market of students who will be able to access this material in their classroom, in their homes, with much greater mobility. So we also do e-box art lessons. So the art lessons have 2 components. So it's an e-box where those materials would go out to a classroom. Again, all the material goes out, and the teacher delivers the lesson. We also do a live online art class as well. So that's it's a ticketed event at a certain time where students can sign up for these classes. We found tremendous growth in this area. Again, this is the first quarter of the last 5 years, and we see that our numbers are pretty normal. So they're just under 400, 380 people, something like that per the first quarter, students learning art activities. And this year, we were able to access 1,190 students doing art activities because we're not restrained by our space anymore. This can happen at their kitchen tables, in their classrooms throughout our community. So in some ways, we're touching more students and doing a much better job in terms of teaching that art. This is one of the pieces that was from a live online art class, and that ended up in the school art exhibition at the Esplanade. We've also inspired while our facilities have remained closed. And keep in mind, our facilities have been closed for a good chunk of this year. So we have something like, sorry, this, small glitch here. So we have our Matterport experiences. So this is where you can actually go online and see the exhibition, a live exhibition. So this is just a video of that. So this is up right now. Of course, we have to prepare to be open, so this exhibit went up even though we're closed. And this is families all over Medicine Hat. And what we're finding is families all over North America can log in and see their children's art on the walls, share this with their family. And there we go. So we've amplified the value of our downtown core. So we've done this in the winter by something like Story Walk. So this is an analog experience, and it's as simple as having that the night before Christmas story posted in businesses downtown. And that draws families downtown to kind of experience the gem that our downtown is, and hopefully generate some activity down there. And we've found through studies that family activities are the number one thing that Albertans want during COVID and will most likely want after COVID as well. We've inverted our Trex gallery on 3rd Street, where we've taken the art and we've put it into the windows. So this goes towards revitalization of downtown. Let's make that downtown friendlier, more vibrant, more engaging. We facilitated community vibrancy by working with groups such as Mural Fest to be able to do the good work that they do. And also facilitating experiences like front porch concerts. So this will happen this summer where citizens can apply to have musicians play on their front porch in their front yard for their neighbors. So all of a sudden we're getting somewhat away from that hub model where we're trying to bring everybody into a central hub, and we're distributing these cultural experiences throughout our community. And the most important thing about that is those are driven by our community as well. Now, so those are some of the things we've done. Here's some of the things we're going to do. So soon we will amplify our downtown, and you should have all have received a text message earlier, I think. So if you just want to pull out your phones, and we'll just go through a little bit about what this experience is like. So this is Downtown Stories, and this will be launching in June. So Downtown Stories is a cell phone guided app of downtown. So what we've done is we've chosen a number of sites downtown, and we've told those stories in a very cell phone friendly way. So if you're at this Hutchins and Sharp one now, you'll see that there's an illustration. You can push on the little sound cue there, and it'll tell you a small story about the Hutchins and Sharp. There's a few images, and there's some text telling the story, the importance of that in our community. If you go all the way down to the bottom, you click onwards, you go to the next site in the tour. Which just happens to be the Pink Lantern. So all of these have a video component, a sound component. People will access these through scanning a QR code or inputting a 10-digit number. It's free to our citizens in tourism, so we're working with Tourism Medicine Hat. But what this does is it illustrates the importance of downtown throughout the ages. So there's content on there from 100 years ago, there's content on there from 30 years ago. And again, this goes to that point of engaging people with the stories so we know who we are, so we know where we're going. Really exciting. And I think, in fact, I did mention that this will launch in June, so there's some pieces missing here, but I think there's our mayor may talk about the Wizard's Eye at some point or something, and he did an interview talking about the Wizard's Eye. So, you know, the importance to the meaning of some of these places for our community. Okay, now I'll ask you to stop looking at your phones and pay attention, right? So, okay, so Downtown Stories. So again, there's a QR code that you could scan to get into this environment. Another thing we're doing downtown is the Tumbleweed Project space. So there's those glass vitrines on the outside of the Esplanade. Now we have a system to curate those. So 4 times a year, those will be have content from local artists and local community groups as well. So again, reflecting the vitality of our community. And those initiatives are community-led as well. So what does the community want to see? What is important for them in those vitrines? We have 172.9 kilometers of bike paths in our city, one of our great assets that we talk about all the time. Our next exhibition will take place on the bike paths. Maybe not all 172.9 kilometers, but certainly some of those bike paths. And that's an exhibition called Spokes, which is about the history of bicycling in Medicine Hat. How can we get that content out to our community in terms of utilization? Well, many, many more people are going to see this content and engage with this content on the bike paths than they do in our museum, particularly when we're closed, but even when we're open. And I think this is the way we're really heading, is like, how can we engage our community with this amazing content developed by the experts inside the Esplanade? How can we get to more people? So this will be a great example of that. And we will facilitate, and I think this is one of the most exciting pieces of work that we're just embarking on, is how can we facilitate by coordinating with and supporting our community partners to do the good work that they do. And so what we're really thinking here is, what if there are one single porthole for all of these different groups and many, many more to assist them with doing the good work they're doing. So that's navigating some of the systems within our organization, some of the funding structures. It's managing a community calendar so we can ensure maximum amplification of having events happen when they're appropriate. Thinking of something like Co-op Place and the Esplanade and Jazz Fest and Stampede, many, many entertainment events. So looking at our entire community more holistically, and then doing that by supporting some of these groups. So that's a really important part of facilitating. Another thing we're looking at is like the block party planning guide. So can we figure out systems where we can make it simpler for our citizens to host small cultural gatherings as well? And again, this is citizen-driven cultural gatherings to increase our community vibrancy. And we will inspire. So we will get back into the Esplanade at some point, and we will have people there. And what we're finding, and some of the reports we're reading, and you know, who has the crystal ball, but there's a pent-up demand for people who want cultural experiences. So people will come back for these cultural experiences. Something like the Black Gold Tapestry, which is in the Esplanade at the moment. This is a 67-meter long tapestry about the history of oil. This is, I would arguably, one of the most important works in Canada right now. The entire history of oil, over 67 meters of tapestry, hand embroidered tapestry. We will gather outside again when it is safe and appropriate to do so. We will inspire through learning. So the Esplanade has had a real focus on children's learning over the past number of years, and we're going to do that really well, but we're going to also have adult learning. So you can take adult classes there. So maybe somebody wants to take a knitting class or a music appreciation class or some other sort of cultural class. We'll be doing that at the Esplanade. And again, what we've learned through COVID is people have taken up baking and knitting and all these sorts of things. They've really engaged in these pursuits. So engaging those people with those pursuits in our building will be one of our plans moving forward. And we will go to concerts again, right? So we will have country music stars coming and playing at Co-op Place. We will have that Esplanade stage with some of the some excellent entertainment from across North America. And we will dream. So I think it's important to know that we are thinking far ahead, and what we've learned from COVID is we need to engage our community differently. So we need to engage them in our facilities, but we need to engage them outside of our facilities as well. So this is an example of one of the ways that we could possibly engage the community outside of our facilities. And this would be to project onto the side of the building. So you know, we all see that Esplanade, and it's a big gray canvas. Could we enliven that canvas somehow? So just imagine those 20,000 artifacts. If we could tell those stories on the outside of our building, could we tell the history of the Medicine Hat Tigers on a video outside of our building? Could we, through video, explain why we are a community of choice on the outside of our building? Could we talk about the natural history of this place on the outside of our building? And we know that not everybody has the time to come to a museum, but all of these small pieces, they start to compile to pique people's interest, so they start to engage in those facilities as well. So in short, we will amplify our assets moving forward, much as we have been, to facilitate those experiences in our community with experiences and events to inspire our community. And with that, I thank you very much.
Very well done. Thank you. Councillor Hirsch.
Bravo, Aaron, you and your team. Well done. You know, it's amazing, you know, I'm always a big fan of when you look at challenges, it always breeds opportunity. And here you are, you could choose the path of, well, we've always done it this way, we're the Esplanade, you know, eventually we're gonna unlock the doors and bring people in, which is a very passive way of doing things. You've taken active step and brought it forward and really hunted people down through their phones, through the location that you're in, which is the downtown. I love the path idea, you're just trying to find everyone. And I would endeavor to say that post-COVID, your numbers are just gonna absolutely skyrocket through the Esplanade visits. Because I think people like myself who know it's a treasure, but in your mind, it's always there. So, you know, but now you're gonna pique my interest. I'm absolutely gonna go check things out. And now you're gonna actually live through my phone. I'm gonna take you up on the downtown thing, because as a person who works downtown, I love it. But thank you for being thoughtful how to engage the community while in this COVID environment and with the pandemic. And I think, again, your efforts are gonna just speak volumes at post-COVID, but certainly I think you've struck a vein with people that are trying to find ways of entertaining themselves while they're down and out and working from home and all that sort of stuff. So, you know, thank you for your efforts, really. You know, I can't say enough about your guys' job. Good job. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Varga.
Aaron, thank you very much. It's kind of exciting that you're telling the history of Medicine Hat. I mean, I've been here for 40 years, and some of those things that I just looked up on my phone, I had no idea of. So it's exciting, that part, that you can actually learn the history, even though you're a longtime Medicine Hat person, that you didn't know things were even in the city. And I think that happens everywhere, even in the world, right, where people are comfortable with where they live, but it doesn't really matter what's happening down the street or what this building means or what it was used for or what was done with it in the past, right? So I think that's very exciting. A question I have, I've got a daughter who's a teacher, and I think she'd be interested in some of those e-boxes. Is there a cost involved with that?
Yes, there is. Yep. So, and what we're finding is it's on par with what a field trip was to have a field trip, right? So there's a base cost, and then it's per student for materials. So, yeah. So there's a cost to all of that. And then, like I say, moving forward, that will be a different income stream, because people will still come for the field trips,
right,
but they'll also do the e-box. Most likely, they'll do both.
My other question, which is probably the most important question, is how do people engage with you? How do they get a hold of you? How do they do it?
So I think currently, like when we're down, it's social media is a big one, and our website, right? So those are the two big pieces. Yeah.
The Esplanade website, I take it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So if you want to do the e-boxes, definitely.
Okay,
Yeah.
perfect. Thank you. Great job.
Councillor Turnbull.
Thank you, Worship. What a brilliant idea. You know, we see online shopping, we see online movies. The great thing about this is arts and heritage that a lot of people, maybe because they don't have transportation, maybe because they're shut-ins, maybe because they're seniors and they just don't want to get out, it's too hot or whatever. And now grandkids can come over and you can get online and see a history of your city that you didn't know. And I read the story about the Viner Center, or not Viner Center, the Finley Bridge, and it's remarkable how that was built. And here it is today, some 100 and some years later, and it's still there. And if you go back and look at the history of it, it's quite amazing. So I think that people who can't get out to Medelta to see that can just get online. I think it's a brilliant idea. And I think Councillor Hirsch is exactly right. This is the silver lining in a very dark cloud. So good on you.
Great, thank you.
Councillor Friesen.
Oh, thank you. I just, silver lining, I like that. You know, at Public Services Committee, we saw this presentation already, and I can tell you tonight, I'm just as excited about it as I was that day at Public Services. I'm just so taken with this. Aaron, you and your team, I just accolades to you, you know, keeping it alive, like Councillor Hirsch stated. In my work world, we call that pivoting. If you're able to pivot, you are most likely able to create additional value, perhaps far beyond what you even saw existed within you at the beginning. And I say you, I mean your organization. And it creates sustainability and ongoing success. So the other thing I wanted to say was in terms of the word inspire, like when obviously as a community, when we see all these different things, they are very inspiring and give us an appetite to try them out, to do more of those things, to take advantage of more of those opportunities. And even me as an individual, like, you know, I have this image in my head of having the musicians on my step while the neighbors are, you know, circulating around, and then, you know, at another time being able to use my my neighborhood gathering toolkit to put together a function. I mean, you've created some user-friendly, realistic, appealing things for all people of all ages. So I, again, thank you so much to your team. I'm just, I'm really taken with this.
Great, thank you so much.
Any other comments? Did I hear you correctly? Streakers, strollers, and scholars?
Yeah.
I'm going to steal that.
You are. You're welcome to. So the concept of that is when somebody walks into a museum, you have your streakers, they're just going to walk through, right? They're just going to take a look. And then you have your strollers who are, you know, they're going to engage in different pieces of content. And then you have your scholars, which we live in fear of because they're going to find all your errors, but they're going to read every single didactic, right? And they're down for that 4-hour visit or until they get hungry. So and that's how people engage with content, right? And unfortunately, it's all streakers online, 24 seconds, right? So it's harder. But yeah,
it was a good one. I hadn't heard that before, so could I get a motion for reception?
I will certainly make that motion.
I'll second that.
If we could vote, please. And that was unanimous. Thank you, Aaron.
Our last presentation tonight, item 4.3, is bylaw 4670, the 2021 property tax bylaw. I have Lola Bart, who's our Director of Finance, and the background for this presentation is in your packet under item 6.3.
Welcome, Lola.
Good evening. Your worship and members of council, thank you for the opportunity to provide the 2021 municipal property tax rates. Tonight, I will provide an overview of the assessment, market, and growth changes in 2021. We will take a look at 3 scenarios for council to consider when setting the 2021 municipal property tax rates, and we are requesting approval for establishing the 2021 property tax rates. So the annual 3-step process for setting tax rates starts with council approving the tax revenue budget. So this has been completed. Council approved a 0% tax revenue increase for 2021. The second step is the assessor determines the assessment values. This has also been completed. The assessment roll was declared on April 14th. And so now we are at the third step, utilizing the taxation framework to set the tax rates. I just want to remind everyone of the basic tax formula. So we take the tax revenue budget, divide it by the assessment base, which determines our tax rate. The tax rate is then applied against the assessed value to determine the tax payment. So the tax revenue starts with the prior year tax requirement of $78.3 million. We then add on our new growth. So for 2021, that was 0.5%. In 2021, we also had a market loss of 1.2 million. And this was mainly due to the market being lower for the non-residential. This was mainly due to the accommodation industry, so the hotel and motel industry, as well as some assessor adjustments and CARB appeals. And so based on the growth and market changes, a 1.1% municipal tax increase is required for 2021 to get to our 0% tax revenue requirement of 78.3. And so when the market is poor, the assessment values are lower, and therefore a higher rate is required. We are expecting the market loss to be temporary in nature and will reverse in future years. And so we are proposing a municipal rate neutralization credit to be applied to all taxpayers, which will result in a 0% tax rate increase. We are recommending that the 832 tax requirement be funded by the Tax Rate Stabilization Reserve. So this next slide looks at the physical and market growth changes by assessment class. So you can see here in this chart, in the physical growth column, the single family has increased by 38 million, and this was mainly due to new development. As well, non-residential increased by 8 million, and this is in the assessment base. This was mainly due to new construction. In the second column, the market change, multifamily increased by 17 million, and this was mainly due to increase in rental rates and higher sales valuations. The biggest change here is the non-residential, which decreased by 89 million. And as I mentioned previously, this was mainly due to the accommodation industry. And so overall, we've seen a decrease in our assessment base of 25 million. And this relates to a tax revenue requirement of 832,000 or 1.1%. So we're going to take a look at the three scenarios here. And this is just for the municipal tax rates. So scenario one is where the tax distribution stays the same and is applied against the new assessment values. So in this scenario, you can see that the tax ratio for multifamily has decreased from 1.25 to 1.18. Non-residential has increased to 2.31. And then the second column, or the second last column on the right, shows the municipal impact after the market changes. And so in the first scenario, you can see that single family increases by 0.1%, multifamily is a decrease of 2.7%, and non-residential increases 3.1%. And then the final column is the dollar impact on the tax bill. Scenario two shows the tax ratio staying the same and applied against the new assessment values. So in this example, you can see that the municipal tax impact for single family is 1.6%, multifamily is 4%, and non-residential 0.1% increase. Scenario three, we are applying the 1.1% tax increase to all classes after taking into account the market changes. And so in this scenario, you can see that the tax ratio has changed for multifamily. It's decreased to 1.22. The non-residential tax ratio has actually increased to 2.25. In this scenario, we are also applying the municipal rate neutralization credit of 1.1%, and this will result in a 0% tax impact. This aligns with Council's desire for a 0% tax increase for 2021. And so scenario three is our recommendation. And the next slides that I'll be going through is based on using scenario three information. So this slide shows the proposed mill rates for each of the different classes. And so for single family, you can see that overall we had an increase of 1.7%. However, after applying the municipal rate neutralization credit, there is an overall increase of 0.9%. And that's really due to the increase in education. So the reason education requisition increased was in 2019, we did not receive the budget information from the province at the time that we were setting the tax rates. And so we estimated the education amount at 8% to align with the expected increase from the province. However, in 2020, due to COVID, the province only increased the rates 4%. And so we reduced the rate in 2020 to adjust for the overcollection. And now we are seeing an increase in 2021 due to this adjustment. I also want to note on this slide the change in farmland. So you can see that farmland decreased 46.5%. And this was due to a 2020 Court of Appeal decision that we received. And it was where a 3-acre parcel at market value was to be assigned to the farmland assessment class. So currently these parcels have the non-residential tax rate assigned to them. And so by applying the farmland tax rate, it would have caused their taxes to double. And so we have adjusted the overall farmland tax rates to be the same as non-residential, so the impact will be minimal. And this is only related to a 1 3-acre parcel section. And so it's not going to be a significant impact to the taxpayers or to the city. So I just want to go through a few examples here. And this first one is the median house tax impact for residential. And so there was no change to the median assessment value. It remained at $280,000. And so the municipal tax increase of 1.1% would be a $21 increase. By applying the municipal rate neutralization credit, there would be a $21 credit on the taxpayer's bill. So then the final total amount of tax increase would be $25 or 0.9%. The example for the non-residential, again, the assessment value did not change on a median non-residential. So $1 million assessment value. The municipal portion of that is at 1.1% or $165. And again, applying that municipal rate neutralization credit, they would get a credit of $165. Overall tax increase of $251 or 1.3%. And again, the increase is really due to the education and Cypress View requisition amounts. So this slide just shows a tax comparison. It's the median property tax for single-family homes. This is based on 2019 data, and it's from the city of Calgary. And so you can see that Medicine Hat is at $2,555. Lethbridge is higher by $615, and Leduc is higher by $579. I do want to note that the information used in this survey is based on specific criteria. So it's based on a 3-bedroom, 1,200 square foot bungalow, finished basement, 2-car garage, 6,000 square foot lot. And so we know that a house of that size in Medicine Hat is a lot less than that same house in Calgary. And so this does have an impact on what we're seeing in this comparison. So I just wanted council to be aware of that. So looking at the tax ratios for non-residential and multifamily, you can see the blue line, or the top line there, is the non-residential one, and you can see that the trend has been decreasing over the years. Again, 2021 is based on scenario 3, so you can see that it increased slightly from 2020 to 2.25. The other line is the multifamily, and that has been remaining fairly flat and stable over the years. However, it has been decreasing in 2020 and 2021. This next slide shows the comparison of the non-residential to residential tax ratio with our comparable municipalities. This is based on the 2020 tax year. We don't have the information for 2021 yet. For for other municipalities, as they are currently going through their rate-setting process right now. So you can see that Medicine Hat in 2020 was at 2.21, which is within the range. Going to 2.25 in 2021, we will still remain in that range. We have indications from the City of Lethbridge and City of Red Deer that they will also be increasing their ratios in 2021. So tonight, we are requesting council to approve scenario 3 to establish the 2021 tax rates. Also to approve the municipal rate neutralization credit for 2021. This will result in a 0% municipal tax rate increase. We are also requesting the adoption, to adopt the revised Education Cypress View Foundation and designated industrial property requisitions. And as the recommendation is for a 0% municipal tax rate increase, we are requesting council to consider giving all 3 readings to bylaw number 4670. And that concludes my presentation. Thank you.
Any, Councillor Samraj?
Thank you, Mayor Luxton. Director Barter, can we go back to the slide that shows the medium house tax comparison that the City of Calgary puts up, please? It took me a while, but this is actually one of the most misleading slides that the City of Medicine Hat likes to share. I understand why we share it, because it seems, at least to the public, that we've got the lowest taxes, some of the lowest taxes in the province, and that must mean that the rest of our finances are in order. It actually obscures some important things. The reason why our single-family taxes are so low is they're actually subsidized on the backs of multifamily properties and non-residential properties. I'll give you a quick example here. So the tax rate for rental apartment buildings for an equivalent apartment building to a house is 25% higher. There's no reason for this. The only reason that I can think of for this is that it's political, that there's, I mean, council has a political interest in keeping taxes low for the most amount of people, which would be people in single-family houses. The trouble with this tax ratio of how we distribute the burden is that it's placing an unfair burden on the most vulnerable people in our community. If you think about who actually pays for this higher tax rates, think of Luther Manor. That's under, they're paying 25% more taxes for no reason. We're talking about Mayfair Manor. We just talked about Councillor Wayne Craven and what he built. We think of these buildings and we think of the landlords that own these places as somehow derelict landlords because they're in such bad shape. What people don't realize is we're actually taxing it, so we're making it difficult for people to do repairs on these things. Gary Ruff is here. We're both on the housing board there. He'll tell you, I mean, the first things that we can defer is maintenance, because that's the only thing we have flexibility on, and this is what we're kind of hurting us with. So that's one problem here. The other thing about the non-residential ratio here, these things are hard to understand for people, and I think the complexity of these systems works against us here. So these are governed by legislation here, and so according to the provincial legislation, our commercial tax ratio could be up to 5 times what our single-family ratio is. I think that's a good way of thinking about it. Imagine if we increased our tax ratio to 5 times what it is now. You can imagine what the impact might be for small businesses. But the fact that we're just double of what our single family is should not make us feel any good about it. I mean, that's still a huge burden there. This is something that I've had difficulty convincing my colleagues about, and I hope, given that this is an election year, that the people in the gallery who are running are thinking about this and are watching this slide closely. Thank you.
That wasn't a question. That was just a statement.
Okay.
Any other questions or comments? Councillor Devanowski?
Well, Your Worship, I appreciate the comments of every councillor, and certainly Councillor Samraj gets to own his comments. I don't want to take exception to them, but I feel like I do because I believe the comments portray councils of the past and present as somehow misleading or manipulating the data to create an end deal that is going to, as you put it, benefit the most, and that being the residential or the greater population. And I don't think anything could be further from the truth, quite frankly, because one of the things I will ask Lola is those ratios, albeit we are always looking at our ratios, and that becomes an election issue every time. We're always comparing ourselves, but it's not always apples to apples. And that's not because it's simplistically an easy statement to make. It's not apples to apples. Our city manager came from a city before coming here, and I'm sure if we had the time, he could talk about how the makeup of that community, Grand Prairie, is very different than Medicine Hats. And so it's one thing to say that our ratios are different than another community, but it's one thing to say, have they been consistently different or consistently or relatively consistent within each of the categories? There are bumps up and bumps down in every category, but certainly I can tell you and I can assure the public, we do not look at them year by year and somehow artificially skew or manipulate the numbers so that the residential will have the greatest benefit and therefore the optics will be to our benefit. So maybe to Lola, if you can just help the public who's probably questioning some of the comments and trying to understand it better. Do our ratios stay relatively, and that's in and of itself a relative term, but do they stay relatively the same, or have there been significant shifts in those ratios between the multifamily, the residential, non-residential, even in the last 5 years?
Yeah, thanks for that question. Yeah, that one graph that I had shown, actually non-residential is declining or decreasing over the years, and multifamily has remained fairly stable, hasn't fluctuated a lot, and has actually decreased. When we look at how those ratios are set, we are, as we're trying to determine what the right level of tax people should be paying, we do look at a few factors here. You know, we want to make sure that it is aligning with council's priorities. We want to make sure that it's fair and equitable distribution of the tax burden, and that it's comparable to other municipalities. And so we take all of those factors into account. And as we are trying to determine what that level should be at and what we're going to recommend to council, we take all of that into account, and those ratios are also looked at to ensure that we are maintaining them at, you know, they're not fluctuating to a greater degree.
Thank you.
Councillor Hirsch.
Well, Your Worship, I appreciate Councillor Samraj's efforts to try and understand and present his point of view. I guess the challenge is, and it was laid out to the people who made it a political issue, you know, it's interesting then, I think if you're gonna take that tact, you might as well take on the whole province of Alberta. I mean, the fact of the matter is, we had a graph up there, and I'm not really a big fan of the comparison of a single-family house, 1,200, because I think I'm not it just is a bit misleading, I'll give you that. But there's a story behind every tax rate for every municipality, and I'll just challenge you, Councillor Samraj, that at the end of the day, when you say, oh, you know, the business owners, but guess what? They're homeowners too. So at the end of the day, it's a tax burden that we all agree that has to be shared somewhat, somehow, some way. But it's a zero-sum game. The funny thing is, we turn around and say, we said no, 0% taxes. So a person would presume their taxes aren't gonna go up this year. Well, guess what? They might or they might not. They might go down, depending on the situation that we're in. We've got a hotel industry that got decimated due to COVID. The way they measure the value of that building is the income approach to value. What does that mean? Well, how many people thought that those hotels made any money in the last year? Anyone? What's their vacancy rate? 10%? So when you do the application of the income approach to value, you go, okay, this hotel made nothing, So suddenly you know that the value of that building is down very, very substantially, which you indicated there, Lowell. So then now it's all up to us whether or not how we're gonna take care of this, because knowing post-COVID, when we return to normal, you're gonna see occupancy return to near or normal levels. But to say and to insinuate that somehow the city of Medicine Hat is different than any other municipality is very misleading, quite frankly, and I almost take offense to it, because I'll tell you, I sat, to a gentleman that was, for example, a bedroom community, let's say, could be Airdrie, Chestermere, all the ones that near Calgary. What do? They said, Darren, we're getting killed here because all we are is a bedroom residential community. So knowing that tax rate and guess what that looks like for them? That single family house is getting killed in their taxes because no one else is there to carry the load. So what are they doing? They're trying to expand their industrial and their commercial base, inviting them to come, giving them sweetheart deals. So you can imagine competing with the Calgarys of the world that have it available. Now they're going, okay, well, maybe I can go to Chestermere or an Airdrie because these tax rates are very attractive. So they're using it for their business development. So there is some movement and some underlying movement afoot for every municipality. So having said that, we have a chart that says, where do we rank, relatively speaking, to other peer groups, other municipalities, and we're right in there. So I do have a misunderstanding of what you're trying to get out, Councillor Samraj, when at the end of the day, we are trying to keep in line in tax fairness to our community and in tax fairness when we measure ourselves to our peers across the province. So if you're gonna call one, you might as well call them all. Thank you.
Councillor Turnbull?
Thank you, Your Worship. Well, I partially agree with Councillor Samraj, and I partially agree with Councillor Hirsch. The situation that I see is that if you have a fourplex that you're using as revenue property, and the city asks you to send in your revenue from each of those properties, that's what they base your assessment of the value of that, if it is substantially lower charging of rent than someone else. And so I always think that that's an unfair assessment. For the person who's gone out and invested their money into a project that they want to build for their retirement, because they charge less money than another person, and sometimes when I own revenue property, I charged as little as I could because I wanted to keep good people. I didn't want it to be wrecked. I wanted to make sure. But then all of a sudden I'd get an assessment that was substantially higher in value because I should have been charging more rent. And in some of the commercial properties, we do the same thing. So if you build a little strip mall and you go to the bank and you get your mortgage payments and you decide this is what you need for return to make a profit, pay your taxes and pay your income taxes. Because remember, people who have revenue property, they don't just take it all home to themselves. They have to pay tax to the government. And so all of a sudden, somebody comes along and says, and I've said this before, it's not your ruling. It's just that if I had that building and I made that, the bank lent me the money based on those numbers, and all of a sudden, the city assessor says, well, you're only charging $8 a square foot. You should be charging your rent at $15 a square foot. So how does that help us build commercial properties, even though you're still paying the higher rate because you're commercial? So I have a problem with revenue. I get, you're right, on the downside is, when things like COVID happens, you can't use the revenue structure because, and I think you guys are right in doing that, because that makes sense. And so I think it should be both ways. So when we come out of COVID, it's already been seeing, price of lumber has gone through the roof. Price of steel has almost doubled. We're going to see some very, very high pricing, which is going to lead to very high construction costs. And so what is that going to do to the tax assessment. So I hear both these guys, and I don't know if there's an answer. So I'm not going to ask you to answer that because I'm not sure there's an answer for it. It's just something that really, when I think about it, if we want people to invest, they need to get a return on their investment, regardless of what side of business that is. We want people to come here, like Methanex or CF, there has to be a return on their investment. And so I think that we got to make sure that we sort of try to find that balance. And I think we've come pretty close here. I'm not saying we haven't. It's just, I'm just not big on using revenue as a major assessment of the value of your property.
Thank you. Councillor Samraj?
Thank you, Mayor Luxton. I appreciate the question, Councillor Hirsch, and I'll try to explain it better. Perhaps, can we go back to that slide, because I think it's helpful for people to see, and I'll try to make this point here. And maybe misleading is the wrong word. Confusing maybe is a better word. Let me put it this way. If we changed our tax ratio so that our non-res ratio was 3.5 times what Calgary's rate is, you know, we might see Medicine Hat even lower than Halifax on this chart. It would look great, except that comes with real costs. So I guess, you know, my counter argument to what Councilor Hirsch is saying is there are politics at play here. We can move these around, and when you shift the burden one way or another, they have real implications in the real world there. If we did what we suggested, let's say we had Calgary's rate here in Medicine Hat of 3.5 times there. You can imagine all the for lease signs that we see on business properties around town. That would increase. I think that's pretty. But everybody living in single family houses would have cheaper rent there. You're making it sound as if it doesn't matter which pocket we're taking it out of because all business owners are single family homeowners. That's not true. And I think it matters what pocket we take it out of. My point that I'm trying to make is that the tax burden is a political decision here. Staff are making it sound as if it's like a very scientific thing. Well, you know, if this increases, well, we do this. It's not that simple. These are value judgments that I think a community can make, that I think council has a role in debating, which we're doing right here. The problem I have is when staff come up here with their recommendations is that staff are picking sides now. It's very difficult for me to argue with the director of finance when she says, well, this is the way it should be. No, it's not the way it should be. And just because everybody in Alberta is doing it this way does not mean it's the right way to be. There are strengths and weaknesses for what I'm arguing, and the same for what you're arguing there. That's all my point is there. We need to have that conversation.
Any other questions? Oh, Councillor Hirsch.
Your worship. So there is no right answer. It's a zero-sum game. So you're right. If we're going to pull money from whatever pots, the challenge is we talk about being a community of choice. So it is most definitely a balancing act between driving to Medicine Hat and saying, what a lovely community, I think I want that house, and suddenly, to your point, which you actually were recommending, that we shift the tax burden off the non-res that has to go to single family. Then they find out, look at the taxes on that. That is not appealing to me within this community. So what do you want? And I don't understand, Councillor Samraj. Like you're talking like this is broken. What it is a level of tax fairness that in a way is trying to make sense of balancing the interests of a business and the interests of a residential owner, whether renting or otherwise. And quite frankly, to your point on the non-res on apartment buildings, no disrespect, but it's not the taxes that actually drive. It's the market rate of rental accommodations in southern Alberta that drives that number. Yes, I totally agree. Taxes is a line item for that, and we do our level best to try and drive that and make that a support. But again, it is about tax fairness, with all due respect. And when you're asking staff to say it's a political decision, it's not a political decision, it's a conscious decision. I really, really do think mentioning the word political insinuates that there's something going on when there's not. It's a conscious decision based on tax fairness and trying to be equitable to all. Thank you.
How about the final word?
Well, we'll see, and then we'll see whether Darren has anything to say. You're assuming that I'm using political in some kind of derogatory way. Far from it. I think this is what we are here to. We debate how, we debate who pays what and what is fairness. That is a political discussion. I don't think there's nothing bad about that. For me, I guess my point is that we are playing favorites with types of housing here in a way that I think is unfair. Now, you say that, well, it doesn't matter really what our tax rate is. The market is going to set rents there. That's a weird thing to say. I mean, overhead depends on utilities and what your property taxes are. It is perfectly conceivable to me that if we dropped our multifamily residential rate to something more in the line of single-family rates, which I think would be fair because we know that higher density housing costs less to service, you might see rental rates decrease. Certainly. So the Medicine housing, we pay $160,000 in property taxes every year. I have yet to hear a reasonable justification for why our tax rate is 25% higher than single-family rates. That's $40,000 for the poorest people in this community that actually could make a big difference there. You don't have to agree with my argument here. I'm just saying that there is an argument to be made here.
Maybe next time you do this presentation, you can do an 8-suite apartment. Because the fact of the matter is that the city of Medicine Hat probably collects less property taxes on a per capita basis than any other municipality in Alberta. And even with the 0.25 increase on multifamily, it will still be less than many other communities. That might be something to add that would help Councillor Sonmarsh. Okay. Any other questions? This is just a presentation. Can I get a motion for reception?
So moved.
Second.
If we could vote. And that was unanimous. Thank you.
Moving on now to our public hearing. Our public hearing tonight's bylaw 4666, bylaw of the City of Medicine Hat to amend bylaw 4168, land use bylaw. This particular property is at 214 4th Street Southeast. Application for medium density to low density. We completed the notifications and advertisement, and no submissions were received.
So I move that the bylaw 4666 be read a second time.
Second.
We are required to have a public hearing. If anybody would like to come down and speak for or against this bylaw, please come down and state your name. Okay. I'll ask a second time if anybody would like to come down and speak for or against this bylaw. Please come down and state your name. And a third and final time, if anybody would like to come down and speak for or against, please come down and state your name.
Hello.
Hi.
I'm Brent Sleeking. This is my wife, Colleen. We're the potential purchasers of the lot. So I was thinking of maybe presenting something, but there's nothing really to present, I guess. I read through the agenda of this meeting and pretty well everything Aaron from the municipality development thing kind of said lots of things there about the lot itself and how long it's been empty. And I could tell you our story behind it is we were driving around, kind of. Our kid was 15. We're driving around. We're thinking, kind of want to move. We live in a 2-story, want to build a bungalow. On the hill, parallel parking, see an empty lot. We're like, well, geez, this could have a nice view. We'd like to build here. Phone Gary, put an offer. That was on maybe January 20th, I think, give or take. And today we're here hoping to hammer a sold sign in there and build our dream house for my wife and our 2 daughters, basically. So that's our story behind it. We're not trying to do anything crazy or anything like that. And like I say, I just thought we'd stand in front of you and tell you our story of it anyway. And like I say, that's our intention there. And we have some plans that are beautiful. We're gonna respect the trees, and that's part of the community we love the most is the trees and the street and everything around there. Downtown, we've been to 2 council meetings now, and we hear about exciting things downtown, and we're excited to build and live there, walk there, and be part of it. So that's basically our intention, and thanks for hearing us out.
Thank you very much. Thanks for coming down. It can sometimes be difficult. Is there any questions of the two presenters? There might be a question from the counselor. I don't see any, so thank you.
Okay, thank you.
So seeing no one else, we'll close the public hearing. I didn't get, if we could any other, actually, could I get a move and seconder on the second reading? We did? Okay. Any questions or comments on second reading? Councillor Samraj?
Thank you, Mayor Gluckston. I'm going to support this application, but I think it does illustrate a few of the awkwardness in some of our land use planning documents here. I think Brent makes a good point, is that this piece of property has been sitting empty for a long time, and now there's going to be development on it, which I think is good. I think what has happened pretty consistently since I've been on council and since been watching the gallery is that our land use bylaw needs to have some kind of flexibility built in, because we set these land uses and then we expect the market to kind of go along with it. But often what ends up happening is that there's just a misalignment of what we think a neighborhood should be and what actually the market can bear there. And some of the rationale, in the briefing note, I appreciate that staff are trying to give us some rationale for approving this, but it really calls into question why we have these plans in the first place. On page 14, I think it's pretty explicit that the Herald redevelopment plan, which we just passed 5 years ago, states pretty explicitly that we shouldn't rezone this to single family, that it should be maintained medium density. Part of the reason is that anytime we want to put an apartment building, and it's very difficult to do that, it's easy to zone down, it's hard to zone up. The other kind of funny rationale here is that it says that we have precedents for deviating from this plan because we've done it before, which is kind of like saying, well, you haven't listened to it in the past, so we don't have to listen to it now. So I do think when we look at the land use bylaw here this year, that we think about these kind of rezoning applications and how to make them better. But I'll be supporting this. Thank you.
Councillor Turnbull?
Thank you, Your Worship. Well, I've always maintained that there's no bylaw in the world, especially in land use bylaw, that's carved in stone. The world changes, the city changes. What was good, we've had 2 municipal development plans in the last 8 years. Why? Because things change. And so nothing can stay the same. We have to be flexible enough to, and be able to adapt to that. Obviously, this property has stayed empty for a reason, because nobody was going to build an apartment building there. It probably didn't fit, or they couldn't build a fourplex. It didn't fit, or something to that extent. And so we do it all the time, yes. We do it all the time, but we do it within guidelines and reasons. And one of the big reasons we have, for me, is that we need to do infill. We need to build our tax base. Absolutely need to build our tax base. We have just come across, in 2021, the city has found $14.8 million worth of operational savings in operating our city. Why is that? Because we have a $25 million shortfall between the amount we bring in revenue and the amount it costs to operate the city. Now, if we think that we're going to get the next $10 million on top of the 14.8 just through operational savings, I think we are badly mistaken. So what we have to do is find revenue streams. We need to find more homes built, more businesses built, so that we spread that tax base amongst more people. So I think anytime we can find young folks like these who want to invest in our city, build a home, pay their taxes on a lot that's been for sale for some time, I say hallelujah, and I am going to support this application.
Thank you. Councillor Turner?
Thank you, Your Worship. I certainly echo Councillor Turnbull's comments. I guess my only question I have here is why it took 3 months to get this approved. That seems like an extraordinary long time to have it zoned from from multi to single, or is there a reason why that took so long to go through?
Does anybody want to try or, oh, okay.
The reason is that anytime you change zoning in the use of a neighborhood, it is a fairly big decision for a neighborhood. I think neighborhoods like to have some understanding of what kind of change is going to happen there. And so anytime you change the land use, it has to be kind of properly announced and the neighborhood given a chance to speak. This one's easy. Zoning down is always easy, but I mean, this falls into the same kind of decisions that an upzoning would. I mean, that's the reason. But again, I agree that it's a long time. If there's ways to build in flexibility with the land use, for example, if people are allowed to automatically kind of upzone from a single family to a duplex or a triplex, that would actually make it easier if you could actually go one way or another.
If I could, Your Worship, I just think it took more than 2 months to get it on our agenda for the last meeting, which was 2 weeks ago, to do the advertising and that type of thing. So I don't know what happened during that 2 months, but that just seems like an awful long time.
City Clerk has some comments.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. To Councillor Turner, so it came to Council on April 5th for a first reading, and then the MGA requires us to do our advertising. And so it skips a meeting and comes back because we have to allow time for that advertising. It's very prescriptive what we must do in that time. So that's the answer to that question. What happens before it gets for first reading, then it will be with the department. So.
Councillor Friesen.
Well, Your Worship, I'm going to support this too. I thought about this quite a bit when we first saw it, and you know, I thought, well, we have the Herald Area Development Plan. We are very often not honoring the spirit and intent of that plan. And then it occurred to me that, you know, we've seen a number of requests, and this subject site as well is predominantly surrounded by quite a few other low-density uses. And it made me think to myself, I mean, maybe it's time, because we've seen so many, and we've made a number of exceptions, and I don't disagree with this one. Maybe we need to look at sometime in the future also at the Herald Area Development Plan. As Councillor Turnbull said, life doesn't stay the same. Our city changes. We do need to do infill, and we do need to look at plans if they're no longer relevant or working for us. So two things, I guess. I'd like to suggest at some point in the future we look at the Herald Plan, and secondly, I'll be supporting this.
Any other questions or comments on second reading? Councillor Iwanowski.
Well, Your Worship, I think a lot of what I want to say has been said, but again, the integrity of a area redevelopment plan, or a Herald plan in this case, it does take significant time, and it is an effort on behalf of staff, but the community as well, literally, and the broader community, to identify a vision and a plan going forward. And so, not to counter Councillor Turner's comment, but it takes time, but it ought to be a little bit, and I say this with some trepidation, onerous for it to come back if you're deviating from what a plan has, because then that plan holds no weight. And I've been on record many times frustrated by quick, seemingly decisions where there's a change that isn't precipitated by a lot of, I'll say, thought other than, well, it's better than what's there. And I don't believe that's how our area restructure plan or development plan works. And so we have the River Flats one, we have Herald, we have a number of them, and the integrity that those plans hold has to create some level of ownership and maybe even challenge when you're trying to deviate from it, so that the integrity of that plan is held up at every opportunity. But just like in the River Flats one, we've made some changes where there was a vision about some development or commercial and it didn't materialize, so we moved away from it. And I've been a supporter in this case. The logic behind the rezoning and the timing and whatnot support us to look at it for what it's worth, and I too will support it.
Councillor Turnbull.
Thank you, Worship. I know we're running a little bit late, but I think the frustration for the young couple is they go to MPC, and MPC said, absolutely, we think this is great. But they weren't aware of the steps that were required by the Municipal Government Act of Alberta for us to change the land use bylaw. There are steps, legal steps that we must abide by, because if not, it could be appealed. And then we're going back to square one. So maybe part of this thing should be a better communication about when people apply for a change in land use bylaw, what the procedures are that they have to wait for. I'm sure they thought they were going to start construction the day after they got permission that the Municipal Planning Commission said, yes, we're going to approve that change. Unfortunately, that's the system. Like it or not, the bureaucratic system is pretty slow at some times and can be really good at other times. But for me, I think our city is doing better, but we need, as a total city, communicate better with our citizens so that they understand what the ramifications are, what the rules are, what the steps we have to take by law, legal steps that we have to take by law. So I'm glad you got it. I think, I know I'm going to support it, but I just think that's an important step that we must do better at communicating.
Councillor McIntosh?
Thanks, Your Worship. Sorry, I have to throw in my thoughts here. Councillor Samraj, you mentioned the need for flexibility. And I would like to say I commend the planning department for having the flexibility to look at this piece of property that has not moved for years and see the opportunity to have a development go on this site, whether it's a larger development or a single-family unit. And I think that is exactly what you want to see our planning department do. Yes, there's a guiding document. I looked back a few years ago, and it was a few months after we passed the Herald redevelopment plan that we approved a law office going in there. That was not part of the plan. That law office had full support of the neighboring community to go in there, and it's been a perfect fit. And I want to see a planning department that has that flexibility to make those little tweaks to improve the community based on those specific situations.
Go ahead, Councillor Samraj.
Yeah, I mean, this is slightly, you know what, it's okay. I'll talk about this later, I think.
Okay. Any other questions or comments? Well, I love this area of town. I grew up in this area of town, and I cannot wait to see what you are going to build there. I'm anticipating now the vote's going to go. We're outside of a public hearing, so I can do that. And I will be driving by to see what you build. And one of the clear factors in this was in the background. It's not a big enough lot for medium density. They would have had to have done land acquisition, land assembly, which could have taken years to wait for another property to come for sale. So let's just be pragmatic. There are beautiful houses, and that is a lovely area of town that's going to be one of the nicest, if not nicest area, other than the River Flats, Councillor Dumanowski, areas of town. And I will be driving by. So I don't see any other questions or comments, so we can call the vote on second reading. And that was unanimous, thank you. If we could get third.
So I move that the bylaw be read a third time and passed.
Second.
Any other questions? Councillor Varga.
Well, Your Worship, there's lots of discussion on this, and I always went back the first time I became a Municipal Planning Commission member. I always asked that when we made these plans, is it a living document? And I was always told, yes, it is a living document, so changes can be made. So here again, we are with something that's empty. It's an empty lot. It hasn't been looked at for a long time. And again, we're making a change so that we get somebody to build a building and put something on there. So I think it's a positive. Even though we've got our plans for the Herald plan that we want to do multi-family, and unfortunately, at this time, it's not going to happen that way. So I'm looking forward to the vote to continue on, and that they start their new life in this new house that they're going to build and make nice in this area, and enjoy their life there and do it, right? I mean, as a councillor, this is a great opportunity. We always talk about increasing the tax base. Here's an indicator that we're going to increase the tax base. Empty lot doesn't make you anything. So a house on that property makes a little bit of money. so, which we've talked about lots today. So I'm totally in favor of this one.
Any other questions or comments? One other great thing is that your real estate agent, and I'm assuming your lawyer, made sure that you made this a condition of your sale. I have seen it a few times around here where the sale has gone through without the zoning. And you talk about MPC and not knowing what rules to follow when people get trapped with a lot that doesn't have the proper zoning, it can be a real nightmare. So anyway, I'll call third reading. And that was unanimous. Congratulations.
Moving on now to reports. Administrative and Legislative Review Committee, April 21st. Just a motion to close for information.
So moved.
I'll second that.
If we could vote. That was unanimous. Thank you.
Report 6.2 is Public Services Committee meeting, April 26th. Again, for information.
I'll move the report for information. You've already seen
I'll second that.
you've already seen the presentation on item number 1.
Any comments? We could vote. That was unanimous. Thank you.
Item 6.3 is the Corporate Services Committee meeting of April 27th with the property tax bylaw for adoption.
So moved.
Any questions, comments?
Second?
I thought I heard a seconder. Who was the seconder? Councillor Barga. Any comments? Okay, if we can vote. One opposing, that passes.
Item 6.4, Administrative Committee meeting of April 28th for the tax installment payment plan adoption and the Medicine Hat annual report.
I will move the report as indicated.
Second.
Any questions or comments? Councillor Friesen?
Well, Your Worship, I just, if I could, if you could bear with me. I was very, very taken with our annual report. It's an absolutely fantastic document. And I felt compelled to make some comments about public services. So I wrote 4 pages of, no, I'm just joking. I wrote a few, I wrote a few comments about public services. So if I could share them with you, just some highlights I think that are really important. You know, the Public Services Division experienced unprecedented times in 2020, as we all did. And all areas of our city organization were impacted by the COVID pandemic, but likely none more than the areas of public service. Emergency response capacity and emergency social services have maintained a continuity throughout. We have adjusted services upwards, downwards, upwards, downwards, in coordination with the provincial government and Alberta Health's pandemic response plan, with the continued objective of supporting the community through the pandemic. Some examples would be Meals on Wheels, all our playgrounds, all our recreational facilities and opportunities, the cultural connections and opportunities we have in our city, and all of the social events. This involved layoffs, redeployments, cross-training, rehiring, finding new ways to deliver services. But throughout all of this, everyone remains committed to enriching the quality of life of our community. Transit on Demand was successfully introduced as a pilot this last fall, and the evolution for transit will become a critical component of ongoing service delivery. We will continue implementing new areas where it's appropriate and effective with less resources. That's a real success story. It's gone very well. We've looked carefully at future programs and services for aging adults, taking a comprehensive consultation process to determine how to best meet the needs of the 50-plus population. And just so you know, today, roughly 1 in 3 of our residents represent this demographic, and it continues to grow. So the work done in that was we ended up awarding a very established service provider to take over the operations of Viner and Strathcona and to enhance services to the community with less money. Our event center has an exciting new name, Co-op Place. The signage is going up, or maybe it's up as we speak, pretty close. We did quite a few upgrades to our facilities, and we made a commitment to an updated comprehensive parks and recreation master plan. So more to come about that in 2021. The fire services strategic plan was updated in alignment with community growth projections, and it takes us 30 years into the future. The recently located fire stations, along with upgrades to traffic signals and so on, dispatch protocols, see the fire service well positioned to meet response capabilities for 30 years into the future with very little financial impact. That is a real success story. I'd like to recognize our ongoing commitment as well to public safety. Police, fire, and disaster emergency management, plus 911 communications. Just one little also dig here for some collaborative work we did. So in 2020, the City of Medicine Hat, Cypress County, and Town of Redcliffe signed a tri-area intermunicipal collaboration framework and also a tri-area intermunicipal development plan, which was actually the first one to be signed in the province. So kudos to us and to our two partners. And finally, thank you to our Managing Director, Mastel, and the Public Services team, and to the whole City of Medicine Hat team. I know I, and I hope all of you, are proud to say we are residents of Medicine Hat.
Thank you. Any other comments? Even though COVID dominated the headlines, I think Aaron's presentation was quite right on, that council recognized that you close the doors and you sit and wait and do nothing, or you can adapt and change. There are over 100 projects in here that are not COVID that this city still, and I said at day one, when we went into lockdown back in March, the business of the city will continue, and it did. And I'm very proud of that. Any other comments? Councillor Hirsch?
Well, Your Worship, and I appreciate Councillor Friesen's perspective from Public Services, and I guess it would be remiss if we don't talk about the financial. You know, it's been a bittersweet ride this term. We don't get any joy from trying to get our financial realities and feet underneath us. I've always said this is not a sexy term. We haven't had any capital. When was the last time you cut a ribbon from a capital project that was authored by the City of Medicine Hat? So, you know, it hasn't been one, it's been very workmanlike, quite frankly, this last term. And I talk like it's over, we still got work to do. But we've had tremendous headwinds that we've been facing as a community. We've had a pandemic. We've had both levels of government challenged financially. Having said that, I think we spared the taxpayer. We looked at revenues. We try to pull every lever. We talk about revenue. We had tonight just an individual that wants to make an application that doesn't fit exactly the box, but you know what, we're gonna make an accommodation, both for their benefit and ours. And I think that is a winning attitude, and I think it's gonna take us pretty far. But despite all that and all the headwinds, I'm pleased with the progress we're making in reducing our expenses and maximizing our revenue by building our tax base, and that's something we said from day one we're gonna do. I'm proud of this work of this council, I really, really am, and administration, but there's still a considerable work left to do. We still find a shortage on our budget to max the expenses that we incur. Revenue, our NGPR, challenges to oil and gas, where we've seen some of our private companies go bankrupt, quite frankly, in an area, in a world that we tread in, is challenging. But quite frankly, before I attest to a job well done, we're not there yet. So if it's this council, the next council that needs to look at the reality of the situation we're in. But all I say to you and fellow council members is well done. Keep the pace and keep doing what we're doing, and it's having a measurable effect. We're saving the taxpayer and sparing the taxpayer the best we can, and I'm really proud of our efforts, and hopefully we can continue on that path. Thank you.
Any other comments? Before I call the vote, I'm just going to put in a, oh, Counselor, go ahead. No, Counselor Turnbull.
So I sit on. Yes, get my mic, right? My wife is watching. How many times do we have to tell you to turn your mic on? I sit on the audit with Committee Chairman Hirsch. And yes, the results of 2020 were in a very difficult year. Were very good, but we are not yet financially stable. We don't have a strong foundation yet. And what we've done is we made some really good inroads this year. One of the exciting things is the restructuring that our city manager has done. And Vest Medicine Hat, who is bringing some exciting things. I think you're going to hear some really exciting things in the next 6 months of what's happening with our city and how much the incentive programs are having an effect of people wanting and looking at the city of Medicine Hat for future expansion and investment. Yes, it's a little bit tougher in the energy field. I don't want to get too deep into that because it's a very complicated matter, and so we'll bring you up to date through the rest of the year as we look at our long-range plans for energy in our city. But we have made some really, really, really good strides forward, but we need to get our city in a solid financial foundation, and then we can do lots of great things from there. But until we get there, we have to stay the course. So, folks, most of us here got elected based on being fiscally responsible, wanting to make changes. It's taken us a little bit of time to get up and going, but since our new city manager has arrived, some two and a half years, the speed of what's happened is quite remarkable. And yes, there's lots of things that people will accuse me of saying, yeah, he's a business guy, and everything's dollars and cents. Yes, but that's how the city runs, on dollars and cents. You got to raise enough money to pay for the services that we all want and expect. And so we do have to run efficiently, professionally, like any organization. And too many of our governments, both federally and provincially, do a horrible job of spending our money and finding ways to spend the money on projects that should be done for our people, and they don't. I think this council will go down in the next years to come as making some really, really good decisions. But we wouldn't have done it without Bob Nicolay, and we wouldn't have done it without his team and the restructuring that he's done and the very, very, really amazing techniques that he has used to find savings, and yet never losing sight of what's good for the citizens of Medicine Hat. So, folks, stay the course. Keep your ears open, because there are lots of exciting things to come. Thank you.
Any other questions, comments? All right, if we could vote. That was unanimous, thank you.
Next up, we have reports for reception. Our first one is the Municipal Planning Commission of April 7th.
I move this report for reception.
Second.
Comments? If we could vote. That was unanimous, thank you.
Item 7.2 is the Police Commission meeting minutes of April 15th.
I will move this for reception.
Second.
Councillor Varga?
Just one comment through the chair to either Councillor Friesen or Dumanowski. I see in the one report on page 176, the community support unit and the stuff that's going on in the schools. I'm just wondering, it's going up on a constant basis. It's moving up, and it kind of worries me that this is happening. But I guess with the sign of the times, I'm just wondering if we're gonna put some more people in there to help out, or whether things are gonna change in the future, because there is incidents that are going up within the schools. So I'm worried about it, right, a little bit. So just wondering what the recourse is, or what they're gonna do to try and improve the situation, if that was talked about.
If I could through the chair, and Councillor Dumanowski is also in a school, so you might have some comments here, but we haven't discussed this in particular other than as part of a whole community response. You make a good point. It might be helpful for you to know that there are some partnerships, there are community partnerships here between the schools and the police for most of those officers that are doing work in the schools. And you're right, I mean, incidents go up and down, but it doesn't mean that individual or individuals that are serving one or more schools, that they're the only ones that would get involved if something happened, because we have a responsibility to the community and the people in it, including schools, to help with offenses and public safety. So although there might be someone assigned to that school, they wouldn't be the only person that could help intervene or help work on that case file. So I hope that helps you. And I don't know, Councillor Dumanowski, you're in the school, so maybe you've got some comments.
Councillor McIntosh, you are too. But Councillor Varga, are you talking about the in-school sanctions, or are you talking about the contact?
Sorry, the community support unit, right, where it's got the graph there, violent threat assessments, and it goes January, February, March.
Right.
And the incidents are going up in all cases, right? So, I mean, in January, we had 324 cases of informal contacts, and now we're at 401. Informal contacts with students, 902, now we're at 1242. So it is substantial in a couple months that there's increase in stuff going on.
So I stand to be corrected, but informal contacts wouldn't necessarily be a negative. In fact, it could be very much seen the other way. So we have SROs, school resource officers, who are assigned to the high schools and also junior highs. And as Councillor Friesen said, the elementary schools typically don't have one assigned to them, but it doesn't remove our ability to access them. In fact, we do. But contacts can mean just making a connection with a kid or otherwise. And so I would have to get added clarity on it, but I think in many cases, those ones would be considered positive contacts. However, the in-school sanctions one has gone up over the last month, and certainly I can't speak to those specifically, but there are events that occur in schools. I've always said to families, schools are a microcosm of the real world, but it's a place of learning, literally, where there's risk and opportunities to grow through the support of educators and police officers, SROs, and others. So, but we're not without situations, and certainly the partnership we have with the police service through our school resource officers is indispensable.
And I guess I thank you for that. But the one that bothers me is the criminal code charge files. It went from 1 to 0, and now we're at 10. So things are happening within the schools. So I'm a little worried about that. So because it is a criminal charge, right? So it is escalating, and I just hope that maybe we can get a handle on it. That's all. So.
Councillor Varga, you always ask good questions, and we always take them back and get an answer for you that it either appears in the next report or we let you know. So we'll find out about that. Sometimes a file has multiple pieces to it, so it could be a number of things in under one umbrella, if you will. But we'll find out for you.
Any more comments, questions, Police Commission report? Seeing none, if we could vote. That was unanimous, thank you.
Moving on now to our new bylaw section. 8.1 in your packets, you'll find bylaw 4670. Bylaw of the City of Medicine Hat to authorise council to impose a property tax for the year 2021 and to exempt certain property from taxation for the year 2021. And with unanimous consent, this can go for all three readings tonight.
Your Worship, I seek leave of council to introduce bylaw 4670 and ask that it be read a first time.
Second.
If we could vote. And that passes 1 dissent.
This time, your worship, I'd ask that bylaw 4670 be read a second time.
Second?
Any questions, comments? I think we talked about this one enough tonight. Okay, if we could vote. And that passes with 1 dissent.
And seeking unanimous consent of council to move to third reading of bylaw 4670.
Second?
We could vote on unanimous consent. Go ahead.
I'd ask that bylaw 4670 be read a third time and passed.
Second?
Questions or comments on third reading? If we could vote. And that passes with 1 no vote.
Our next new bylaw is 8.2 in your packets, bylaw 4672, a bylaw of the City of Medicine Hat to amend bylaw 3302, the tax installment payment plan bylaw, and also this can go with unanimous consent for all 3 readings.
Once again, seeking leave of council to introduce bylaw 4672 for first reading.
Second?
If we could vote. That was unanimous, thank you.
Your worship, I'd ask that bylaw 4672 be read a second time.
Second?
Any questions, comments? I have to applaud staff on this one. It's kind of a unique, and they're waiving the fees, and if people want to get on the tax installment payment plan, you can still do it now, even though normally you would probably start that at the end of the year or January 1st. So it's just another innovative way that we're just trying to help people spread their taxes out over time for some people that aren't paying them to their mortgage. Any other questions or comments on second reading? If we could vote. That was unanimous, thank you.
Once again, seeking unanimous consent of council to move bylaw 4672 for third reading.
Second?
If we could vote. Go ahead.
I'd ask that bylaw 4672 be read a third time and passed.
Second?
Any questions, comments on third reading? If we could vote. And that passes.
Notices of motion now, Councillor Samraj.
Actually, if it's okay, Mayor Cluxton, I'm going to think about it for 2 weeks, come back. Thanks.
Bring that back in a couple weeks.
Okay, moving on now to new business. We had a vacancy occur for our Combative Sports Commission. Council would like to appoint Kyle Pudwell to the Combative Sports Commission, effective immediately with a term to expire December 31st, 2023.
So moved.
I'll second that.
Any comments? If we could vote. That was unanimous, thank you. Seeing no more business before this council, we're adjourned.
Participant exiting. Rochelle Pancoast.
Brad May.